John Gilroy. I'm sitting here at Monk's Barbecue in lovely downtown Purcellville, Virginia, and in walks AJ Nash. He flew here all the way from Minnesota. He came for the brisket. He's going to stay for the podcast. Hit the music, Manny.
Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, where industry leaders share insights on innovation with a focus on reducing cost and improving security for federal technology. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcast.
Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, the podcast that connects you to federal technology leaders. My name is John Gilroy, and I will be your moderator. Well, it's kind of true. I am sitting at Monk's Barbecue, and I did see AJ as he walked in the door. He came down here to talk about external security, his company, ZeroFox. So, right off the bat, what do you think of this place? Is this a high-class place, AJ, or what?
You know, to be honest with you, John, this is my kind of place. Like, there's no sawdust on the floor, but otherwise, it's really my kind of place.
Well, I mean, 3 years ago there was. This is a new floor.
It smells amazing. You got the corrugated steel walls. You got the whiskey bottles that have been turned into light fixtures. I've been told the barbecue is amazing. I'm going to get some soon. I haven't gotten to it yet. So this is my kind of joint, man. I mean, I got the boots on. I'm ready to go.
Yeah, I want to do a half hour on brisket, but we're going to talk about endpoint security. Is that okay with you?
I don't know. Brisket's more interesting sometimes, but yeah, sure. Let's do it.
ZeroFox, Z-E-R-O, ZeroFox. So I was at a trade show. I don't even know where I was. And you see all these little logos and signs and the usual suspects, Palo Alto and all the regular ones. And I saw ZeroFox. I said, ZeroFox? What the heck's that all about? So I contacted, I think, your media people, and I said, well, what does ZeroFox do? Oh, we do. Oh, come on, bring it on the show. So that's what I want to talk about, ZeroFox. So tell us about the history of the company, maybe the origin story, and 10 years. So why'd you guys start?
Yeah, ZeroFox. So 10 years ago, a small group of people started the company. It was under a different name then, to be honest with you. I don't remember it because I haven't been in the company that long. I've only been with the company a couple of these years. But the intent originally was understanding they had a vision that we needed to protect people in the social media space, mostly social media brand protection. So that's where the company really built itself off of. And then since then, it has expanded over the years, a lot of times through acquisition. So now we do anything really that's external cybersecurity, from the very proactive, deep and dark web intelligence to the very reactive incident response, and anything in between at this point. You know, whether it's attack surface management, whether it's digital risk protection. We have physical security as well now. So it's a wide range of opportunities to protect folks, all built within one platform. It's been a great journey for the company. Acquired a couple of great companies along the way, have gone public, and it's really a great place to be, frankly.
Now, when you think of the attack surface, if you look at the last 5 years, pre-COVID, post-COVID, all kinds of devices are out there, all kinds of signals coming from satellites, coming from railroads, coming from everywhere. It sure looks like the number of remote points have increased drastically. It's almost like you were into external security before external security was cool or something, did you foresee this? I mean, it's blown up all around us. There's sensors everywhere.
Yeah, 100%. I think that, the leadership really, the term gets overused, but I would say they were visionaries in this case. They saw it before it was there. And while most organizations, rightfully, were focused internally, a lot of people work, inside their own wire, right? Wherever their endpoints are and everything internal. This leadership recognized that the external was the future and really, was able to plant a flag there. And as you said, it's expanded, exponentially now. So the threat landscape is enormous. Every company's footprint gets bigger every moment. Some of which they recognize and know about, and some of which they don't even see. So being ahead of the curve on that, I think, was a really stroke of genius, so to speak, for the leadership team.
My wife's a Latin teacher, so I get to use fancy words. So the word I'm going to use is prescience.
Yes.
So perhaps you guys had the prescience, but you ain't the only ones, man. There's a podcast in town called Feds at the Edge.
Right.
And
sure.
Because they saw it too. They said, look, this is all our Feds. They can be military people.
Yep.
This can be, FEMA trailers. It could be so many different items, but they're at the edge. And if you look up over your heads, there's a bunch of satellites out there with all kinds of remote sensors now too. So it's everywhere. It's everywhere.
Yeah. The edge, it keeps moving, right? It's just further out, and what we consider to be our threat landscape or our environment continues to expand out. It's an ever-expanding world, essentially, right, as the technologies increase. So it's a great place to be from a business standpoint, to be honest, because there's always more opportunities to protect folks. But it creates a lot of risks, and it's frightening and scary for those who aren't prepared for it.
Back in 1999, I was in first grade. Someone's going to believe that.
No way.
Back in 1999, there was this little thing called a distributed denial of service attack. Okay, it's a little minor thing, and it kind of went away for a while. There's all kinds of new attacks. But in the last 2 years, what we've seen is a proliferation of remote access points. And guess what? Breaking news here, AJ. The DDoS has popped itself up again.
Well, sure. DDoS is a great way to attack.
Yeah, thank you. It's underscored, endorsed by AJ Nash.
Absolutely, yes. No, you can do this. Threat actors actually provide this as a service, right? So you can go into the deep and dark web and you can hire somebody to do this if you want. You don't even have to have the technical skills yourself. They have all the botnets ready to go, and you can set up DDoS attacks. It's brute force. It's old school. And it's very effective and, frankly, pretty inexpensive.
Okay. I opened up with a silly joke about you walking in, and then I mentioned external surface management, external security. So how do you define the external service for an agency?
Yeah, so the external attack surface it's really anything you have that's exposed, right? You've got all of your endpoints, you've got your IPs and your URLs, you've got your APIs, which a lot of people don't think about. All the technological pieces that you have on the external attack surface. But also, I'll take it a step further and say it's people as well. And I think that's the next step that we're starting to get to, that people are recognizing, is you've also got to be able to protect your personalities. Maybe not every person in an agency or an organization or a military unit, but certainly the high-profile personalities, because those social media accounts, if they don't have a presence, somebody else will create one on their behalf and impersonate them. If they do have one, it can be compromised. And that's where you get into a lot of messaging. So it's a problem if you have a senior leader who appears to be advocating for a position that's false, whether it's surrendering a position in a military, for instance. So it's really important to be able to protect all of those personalities as well. So that's also part of the external attack surface, and that's something that we're really getting into and expanding upon, and I think people are starting to see that.
Well, I think it's obvious you have a strong background. You're very articulate. You know what you're doing. There are people who are listening to this, maybe jogging or walking their dog, and they're going, yeah, where's he been? Show me the money. Do you have any contracts? So maybe, we've been here or there. I don't know where you've been. So tell me about the audience. Give us a success story for the federal government.
I mean, myself personally, I did about 19 years in the intelligence community. I was Air Force for about 9.5 years and retired. I was a linguist, for anybody who's curious, and not a very good one. So I did mostly intel analysis, and then did another 9.5 years as a defense contractor. I've been in the private sector about 8 years, and I build intel programs, help people build and mature them. From the company standpoint, I guess the big bona fides, if you want to know how we do in the government space, is that OPM contract, which just renewed. I want to say it was $289 million, I believe, is the deal. Protects 22.1 million people who've been affected from past breaches. I'm one of those people, because again, anybody who ever had a clearance when those breaches happened was affected. So, we have a deep commitment to the government space. We have some other government contracts. We don't talk a lot about them publicly, obviously, but we certainly have the bona fides and the chops to work in that space.
And my listeners just want to hear past performance.
Sure.
They just want to say, you got a Hard Rock Cafe. Oh, so you've been there. Okay, that's all I want. I mean, that's just like a check mark. It's like when I listen to an NFL analyst. Oh, this guy played in the NFL for 5 years. Okay, so I know he was like his brains rattled. So it gets credibility, doesn't it?
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I did, like I said, I did about 9.5 years defense contracting. I've done contract proposals. I was part of the 10-year, $7 billion award that we won. So I've been on that side of the job too. It's not easy. So I've been an operator. I've been a practitioner. I've also done the business side.
Some people like to listen, get information. Some people like to read. If you're a reader, well, good for you. You can go to ZeroFox.com, and there is a guide there called A Buyer's Guide for Digital Risk Protection. It's like, hey, read this, you don't need us.
Well, it's a pretty good primer to help people understand what we mean when we say DRP. I think digital risk protection as a term is, it's a little flawed. Some of the terms in industry end up not quite making sense because you're not protecting risk, right? But when you read the primer and you start understanding what we're really talking about, what is your digital risk? What are we trying to protect against? We're really trying to minimize risk, right? And it's really just about understanding your space. Again, that social media, that brand protection, all the things that make you, whether it's as an organization or as an individual, need to be protected, because if people can impersonate those, they can take advantage of your persona or your organization and cause all sorts of harm, whether it's for customers or prospective customers or just the public in general.
We'll go back to 1999. I used to watch actually commercial TV back then. There's this guy named Ron Popeil. And he'd say, but that's not all. You also get, but that's not all. You also get. So if you go to ZeroFox.com, you get the digital white paper. We know that. But that's not all. You also get a podcast.
That's right.
So the podcast is your podcast, the Unspoken Security Podcast. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Unspoken Security. So we launched that last year, I think October. I should go look at my calendar before I have these kind of discussions. But somewhere in that October timeframe, we've got about 12 episodes out now and a handful more that are ready to go. The concept really was to get practitioners together to have honest, authentic conversations, really almost no editing, very little prep time, frankly. And the idea was to have those conversations so that people could hear what we talk about generally when they aren't listening. These are the kind of conversations we have, at the bar, after hours, at some of the big conferences. They're not sales pitches. They're not designed to solve problems necessarily. Some do, but mostly we just kind of get together and figure out what our thoughts are and what's going on in the industry. And they're pretty challenging and open. They're very raw and gritty, and there's some cursing in there, and we challenge each other. But the idea was to have some authentic discussion, not an hour-long infomercial. Nobody wants that.
Yeah, I listened to a bunch of them, and in the first one, the guy mentioned Ron Popeil.
Yes.
Because your first guest said, I don't want to be no stinking Ron Popeil.
yeah, Neil. That's Neil Bridges who said that one, for anybody wondering. He's a good friend of mine and was a good guest, thankfully. Got me off to a good start, because he also hosts an ongoing podcast that he's very good at. So it was nice to have him get us kicked off right.
Okay, we got to get some dirty details here. Because you have a strong background, you should be able to define some terms. And so there's a term that's bandied about in your website called the dark web and the deep web and the surface web. So maybe you can differentiate those three for our listeners. Got the surface, that's what everyone goes to. You buy a pair of shoes at Amazon, or you buy a book, Unfair Mindshare, at Amazon. And so deep web, dark web, different. What's it?
Yeah, the surface web is anything that's indexable, really, is what we say. So anything you can go on Google and get, that's your surface web. So that's where most everybody lives and works and operates, although it's actually a fraction of the internet. If you get into the deep and the dark, and there's debates on how you want to split those up and those terms. Some people do conflate them, but the deep web is the non-indexable version of the internet, basically. So it's the other, depending on what stats you're using these days, 70, 80, 90% of the internet. And then the dark is just the ugliest parts within that, essentially. So you get into these closed communities where you're dealing with criminal enterprises that'll sell or buy just about anything, up to and including human body parts, criminal activities. So that's where a lot of our operators, thankfully, are able to maneuver and gather intelligence. We have human operators there, as well as technical collection capabilities, because you don't want to go there. Like, I don't want to go there. Most of the average people don't want to spend time there. Organizations need to know what's going on in the deep and the dark web, because that's where threats really start in a lot of cases. But you don't want to go there yourself. I've often told people it would be like going into a biker bar wearing a suit and a tie. You might get in the door, but you're going to stand out, and it's probably dangerous for you.
Yes, I've been in one or two biker bars in my day, and I can agree with that.
How'd you blend in, John?
Well, actually, a few years back, I did blend in. Okay, fancy pants terminology here. Something you'd never hear in a biker bar. Automated remediation. What the heck is that?
Automated remediation. So, so in that case, what we're talking about is we have a takedown capability. We have a really strong relationship with a lot of the web hosting companies, and we have a relatively new relationship that was strengthened with Google that sets us up to be in a position when we have customers who have challenges they've identified. We've alerted them through a platform, and then they want something taken down. It's fraudulent. We're able to do that, but in some cases we can do it automatically if it doesn't meet certain criteria, and we know this is fraudulent. We can do the takedown on their behalf. We can put in the request, and then we follow that up. So the challenge with takedowns, twofold. One, you have to make sure your request is valid, and valid isn't necessarily what you and I think. It's what the hosting organization thinks. Does this content violate their terms of service? And then you have to be persistent, but also not so pushy that they don't want to talk to you anymore. So we do have people and a platform that helps with that, and then we can communicate that back. So when somebody puts in a request for a takedown, or if we've identified something to take down, they can watch the platform and see the progress as it's going forward. And so it's saving people hundreds of hours of time and energy that would be needed in order to try to do these takedowns themselves.
Yeah, I know that's a very specialized phrase, and that can mean many different things for many different organizations. So got up early this morning, and I went to your website, and I started taking notes because I'm compulsive about these things. And I started trying to figure out what the attack surface was. And according to your website, what I learned, they talk about brands, they talk about apps, talk about data, people, domains, and you mentioned API earlier.
Yep.
I think that, it wasn't listed on your website, but it was the first thing you brought up. Now, there's a gentleman who lives 1 mile from here. His name is Patrick Sullivan. He's a vice president at a company called Akamai. Mm-hmm. He said, John, maybe the API is a network. I said, wow, that's an insightful observation. Maybe AJ will agree with you on that, because maybe that's what's becoming these days with so much interoperability.
100%. Yeah, I think that's, the growth of that technology and the use of that technology over the last 5-10 years, it makes it a huge part of the attack surface at this point. If somebody can compromise your API, it's just like if you have compromised a certificate, right? Anything you can do that compromises something that's already considered to be valid is going to be a problem for you. And when you get into the API, then you're able to inject all sorts of challenging situations into what is a legitimate system. And we're seeing the results of that right now. So absolutely, I'd say it's a huge part of your attack surface at this point.
The emperor of podcasting has issued a mandate this morning, and whenever you talk about technology, you have to say the word artificial intelligence, and then you have to follow it up with zero trust.
Sure.
Neither words you've used previously. I haven't heard these all day here.
No.
And so artificial intelligence, does this fit in with your offering? Or
it does a bit. So we do have an entire team that was just stood up this past year, to focus on AI. So we're slowly working in that inside of our platform, but very diligently and carefully, right? A lot of organizations have jumped ahead on this, I think, or at least their marketing has jumped ahead. And a lot of people are jumping on board with AI as the solution for everything. It's going to solve all our problems. It's going to replace all our people, which is all untrue.
Yeah.
To be clear, it's all very untrue. And I've seen a lot of organizations that are talking about AI-generated intelligence, end-to-end intel with AI. And I've said, if you believe that machines can do this, let me know when your replacement shows up and I'll talk to them, because that's not going to work. But what we have found is there are some pieces of low-hanging fruit where AI is really valuable in collection, certainly, and in the ability to make sense of large bodies of data and collection and bin those properly. Some cases all the way to some very basic, first-line analysis. So we are able to do some of that in the platform and say, this means this. Some things are that simple, and therefore you can have a system that writes a quick summary. It says, based on past experience, this is what we've seen, and this is what we would expect. We do clearly label those things as being AI-generated, not human-generated analysis. And we're working in that space to see what's next. The other piece for AI for us, is we're dealing, of course, with social media and brand protection a lot of times, and a lot of that is visual, not just text. And having the ability to have technologies that can say, is this fake, is this real? You get into like deep fakes, the synthetic media. So we're certainly working in that space as well, where AI does have a role to play. But we're not running out and saying AI is going to solve everybody's problems for everything. I think we're taking a really solid, paced approach to this, and coming up with some pretty good responses so far.
Believe it or not, I was a history major many years ago, and I still enjoy reading history. And I'm going to bring up a quote from an old guy, an old historian, a guy named Francis Bacon. And the reason I kind of tease that AI, zero trust stuff out there, because if you were to look at the landscape in the federal government today, there's so many different, floating this out there, compliance and this and that, and so many things. And Francis Bacon said this. He said that most important advances are the least predictable.
Sure.
So what's going to happen, AJ? Well, I don't know. But maybe something will combine with something, and red and blue gets purple. Look at all the things you've seen. We know about your background. You've seen some things that are not good.
Sure. Yep.
And how can you? I think zero trust in general is probably a good response to what's going on. And is there going to be limitations? I don't know. So what do you think about this unpredictableness? What can people predict about AI?
Well, that's a really good point, right? Every time I see somebody whose title says futurist, for instance, I'm very interested to know what a futurist is and how you got that, because, and that's not to make fun of anybody who has the title. I'm genuinely curious what that means, because I have a hard time seeing what the future is. I did spend a lot of time in the intelligence community, and a fair amount of my career, I actually did work on projecting what we thought, assessments, we would say, for future activities, with a lot of caveat language. It's very difficult. I liked being on the edge, so I would do some of those things. But you're going to be wrong more than you're right. You just get used to that. I would say the Russia-Ukraine situation is a perfect example of where everybody I know, every expert, was wrong on what we thought was going to happen in terms of Russia invading. So predicting the future is incredibly difficult, even if you have deep experience on what's happened in the past and some pretty good understanding of where the pattern's going. Things change. From an AI standpoint, I'm I'm as curious as you are about what the future is going to be. I'm nervous. I think right now, if somebody asks what the future is, I think a lot of people are going to overpromise. I think a lot of people are going to trust machines to do things without understanding what's going on in the magic box, right up until bad things happen. Organizations are going to get sold a bill of goods on how you can automate everything and you don't need people. You can cut your overhead. You can do all these amazing things, and that's great right up until something terrible happens. And then they realize there's a lot of flaws in that. I think ultimately what we're going to get to is where AI is an enabler. It's going to turn people into superhumans in a lot of cases. I think there's going to be a human-machine partnership that will continue to grow and improve, but I don't see AI replacing many people. Some very low-lying jobs, possibly. But the other challenge you have with that, and I've challenged some people who've said AI is going to do all these things, is it's going to replace all the baseline, first-line analysts, right? First-line security analysts, first-line intel analysts. Okay, well, let's assume that's true. Where do you plan on getting the next set of managers and senior managers and directors? Where do they come from? Because if you don't have any baseline people like me are going to retire someday, I hope, or just die. And everybody else that's, my age and the groups, just behind me and just ahead of me, we're all going to go away someday. So what are you going to have then? Machines are going to continue to grow and mature, and I think that's a flawed concept. So, I would say we're going to end up with a human-machine interaction and relationship is probably the future, and they'll continue to grow and merge a bit more, but I don't see machines taking everything over.
Okay, I got a final question, and you brought up the topic of Russia, so I'm going to go back to Russian history. And I'm going to use a quote from a guy named Vladimir Lenin. This is the first time I've ever done this. This is a new one. And I think this applies to external security, and I definitely think it applies to threat intelligence. Mm-hmm. So what he said famously was, you probe with bayonets. If you find mush, you push. If you find steel, you withdraw. And so we see people going after the DOD, and they're pushing and pushing and trying to find the steel, aren't they? They're trying to find the mush, actually.
That's right. They don't want the steel.
No.
Well, and I mean, that's a great quote from Lenin. I wasn't aware of it, but it makes sense, right? It's adversaries look for the path of least resistance, right? And I talk about a lot with criminals and threat actors are like water. It's the path of least resistance. They're going to find a way in, and they're going to keep poking around. And it's a great quote. It still holds up over time, holds up in technologies that didn't even exist when he said it, because that's the point, right? And that's why we all try to harden our systems, harden our edge, be a more difficult target. In my personal life, to give an example, I've given a few times, I have a home. I have 12 cameras. I have an alarm system. I have dogs. And because I live in America, I have guns. That's defense in depth. And that's a pretty hard target. If people probe and the alarm goes off, they go someplace else. I live in a nice neighborhood. I'm not real worried, but I suspect my house won't be the first one robbed. And I think that's what we're all trying to do, is be a hard target within your community, at least, among your peers, to be a harder and harder target. Because adversaries will continue to probe, as he said, and they're always looking for weak spots. And it comes back to that whole attack surface piece. We have to understand what we look like to the adversary. That's the biggest piece with attack surface management, is it gives you the adversary's view of you. All that IT that you didn't know existed, that shadow IT, all the social media that was spun up on behalf of your organization that you don't know exists, things like that. That's where adversaries are going to look. That's the mush. So it's really important to know ourselves really well. Go back to Sun Tzu, for instance. And I think that's a perfect example within that quote. You've got to close down that mush and make them run into steel over and over again.
Well, this has been a wonderful interview. In the show notes, I will put the link to the Buyer's Guide for Digital Risk Protection. I'll also put a link to your podcast, and that podcast is called Unspoken Security. You have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, AJ Nash, Vice President of Intelligence at ZeroFox.
Thanks for having me, John. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Federal Tech Podcast. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts.